Good morning. Today we're going to start talking about topic 5, and topic 5 is generally about performance appraisal. We're going to break this up into 4 different presentations. In the first one, we'll just kind of talk about overall performance appraisal and what it's about. Then we'll talk about formats that are used for rating. Then we'll talk about errors in rating. And finally, we'll kind of talk about which directions this work in a performance appraisal is moving to, at this moment. So, to give it a good start, performance appraisal is just a systematic review and evaluation of an employee's job performance and the delivery of that feedback. Okay, so it's not just the actual evaluation, but the way in which the feedback from that evaluation is given back to the employee. Okay, clearly we use it for hiring and firing, right? That's a pretty big deal. Or promoting, actually, not hiring, obviously, because they haven't performed anything yet, right? So promoting or firing, but also to coaching. Let's take an employee and identify their weak points and coach them and find ways, things of this nature, but also in a more practical perspective to provide a line of defense. So when employees are fired, you're able to document using your performance appraisal system. You're able to document and justify those decisions. We find performance appraisal systems that are not well designed. You get the wrong people promoted, the wrong people fired. Employees feel treated unfairly. We've talked about this whole unfair thing, and they start to treat employees that feel as though they're treated unfairly. Well, start to steal, will start to backbite, will start, etc. And so you can get low motivation, low commitment, all kinds of job dissatisfaction problems. And of course lawsuits, which is more than a small thing. Okay? So IO psychologists are good for performance appraisal. I mean, all psychologists really would be. Because really, performance appraisal is all about quantifying hypothetical constructs, okay? Because we've kind of already hinted at it, but remember, job performance as a hypothetical construct. Well, how do you measure job performance? How do you quantify job performance? How do you quantify job performance in a way that is sensible across multiple jobs, okay? Because if you're talking about, number of products produced per hour, well, on one part of the assembly line, they're creating one kind of a product, and on another one, they're creating another, and you can't directly compare them, what's better, 4 fenders or 3 radiators? I have no idea, okay? You can't compare this way because of this stuff. Performance management is related to performance appraisal, and it involves performance appraisal, but performance management is more of a cyclical idea. An idea that performance appraisal is not a one-time deal. It's not just like, oh, you have your annual review or something like that. Instead, the appraisal process is part of a larger process that managers should be doing, in which they help employees set goals, okay? Coming up in this next cycle, what I think you should do: coaching and feedback. Throughout the cycle, a manager, observes the employee and says, oh, look, here are places where you could be improving your performance. And then comes the performance appraisal itself, and then finally developmental planning, which in a lot of ways is like the goal setting as step 1. Okay, it's kind of a let's look at the bigger picture and see how you're developing in your organizational future. So a newer method, or common method nowadays, I want to say newer method, but nowadays this is pretty much the gold standard, or some version of this notion of multi-source feedback, or 360 degree, right? 360 is a full circle, everybody around. And so using ratings of subordinates, peers, supervisors, clients, and even the self. And this is kind of what it goes on like at the university. Every year I I get a raise. Okay, it's a joke. All right, whatever. Imagine there is a raise. What happens is raises at Wesleyan, when there is money available, whatever, are based on a concept like this. It's based on they call it merit pay. But basically what happens is every single year I have to put together this 360 degree feedback package. I mean, we don't call it that, of course, but this is what it is. Because I take student evaluations, yeah, yours, and I take a self-assessment, and then I have to implement peer feedback. All right, we have to every 2 or 3 years I have to do something called peer observation and evaluation of teaching form. So in other words, one of my peers comes in and observes me and gives feedback. And then of course all of this gets forwarded up to my dean, and my dean provides his feedback. And this entire package together is what my raise right, what my raise is based on. Yeah, that sounds anything more that I didn't just say. Okay. Basic assumptions. This is an interesting idea. When multiple raters are used, participants should be happier because they're more involved in the process. Okay, and again, we're gonna rehash this idea over and over and over. If an employee doesn't feel that the rating system is fair, then they will not be happy, and all kinds of bad results will happen. So happier. When multiple raters are used, hopefully any idiosyncrasies, I love the word, it's a nice word, basically biases that any one rater would have should be wiped out. So if your supervisor doesn't particularly like you as a person for some reason, hopefully all of the other forms of the feedback will sort of knock that out. And this last one is actually no small thing. Multiple raters bring multiple perspectives, okay? And so what this means is that my students are clearly giving a different perspective on my performance than my dean is giving on my performance. You guys would be looking at different elements. You are seeing me in different contexts. And so it gives a broader perspective to the entire package of performance now. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Recommendations. Be honest about how ratings will be used. That's not as simple as it might sound. Help employees interpret and deal with the ratings. Yeah, that's interesting. That's one of the jobs my dean has, is that at the end of every year, after going through all of these performance appraisals rather, he does in fact package them all together into a final report in which it interprets and gathers and kind of puts it all into one little package. Avoid presenting too much information. And again, one little package is what gets presented at the end. Train raters. That's an important thing. And we'll talk more about rater training later somewhere. I don't know where, but somewhere in this topic. I saw it somewhere. And if necessary, outsource. I don't know how you would. That's just, hey, I pull that out of the text. Okay. There are some assumptions in order for this kind of multi-source feedback to work. As we said, the assumptions are that we call it a quote benefit right here, right? Or no, somewhere back here. We call it a benefit, but yet at the same time, it's an assumption. We just assume that potential biases will be removed if you have 5 perspectives. We assume that involvement will make participants happy. And we assume that different viewpoints are in fact valuable. So those things that we just said are benefits are really assumptions, okay? Terrible assumptions. Okay, I mean assumptions. They make an ass out of you and me, right? So here might be a development report, a 360-degree development report. And so we can see in this particular report that there's what? 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And so, 3 lines anyway. You've got a peer report, a direct report, what? 1, 2, 3, I guess there's 4. And then where's the average? That solid line. I don't see it. Whatever. The point is that each of those lines is a different... Oh, I do see it. Ha, 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 ha. And so, interesting. The direct report matches pretty well with the average. And so you're getting 1, 2, 3, 4 different perspectives, with the solid black line in the middle-ish being the average of those 4. We see that, I see, in the direct report, this particular person is showing rosy, I am better than I really am, right? Look at the peer. This person's peers is doing a pretty good job of predicting the average. this person's supervisor is under predicting this guy's performance, right? And so all of a sudden we find different people in this process giving different perspectives quite differently. Okay, how to provide feedback. And this is critical, because if you provide feedback to an employee but they don't look at it, what's the point of providing it, right? I mean, it doesn't work. And so we find employee development is largely a function of their receptivity to the feedback, right? Do they take it? The organization's approach to presenting it, the emphasis on placed by, okay? So we find that, again, this notion of feedback, I mean, here's a slightly different phrase for what I kind of talked about. This notion is that the feedback process is not a one and done process. It needs to be a cycle. Okay, a cyclical process in which employees are motivated to plan and engage in actions or behaviors that benefit their future employability. So it's an ongoing thing. They take the feedback, use it to benefit their performance so that their next performance appraisal will in fact be improved. Okay, blah 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 blah. Oh, the keys. Employees need to attend to the feedback, actually read it, process it, that is, actually understand it, and 3, actually use it. And you find that different employees are more or less willing to engage in these 3 steps. And again, the feedback process is absolutely useless if the employee, it doesn't matter how good of a system you put. Again, though, the feedback process always helps to document so that you don't get sued later on, okay? That's hugely important. But as far as for developing the employee across time, these 3 are necessary. And if the employee is not willing to make these 3 steps, there's just no point, okay? Feedback is most effective when targeted at task rather than at self. Yeah, this is the fundamental principle of any behavioral management system, whether you're talking in counseling and therapy or here in the industrial organizational. You don't say you're a bad person. You say that particular behavior was subpar. Okay, you don't target the individual. But what's interesting is there's some work here. 1/3 of the studies there under my face, and 1/3 of the studies reviewed by feedback produced no change or in fact made performance worse. And so what an interesting idea. I would assume that in those cases where feedback made performance worse, it was because the feedback system was not well designed. Okay? As we said, poor feedback can actually lead to detrimental outcomes. So in order to understand feedback, you need to understand the feedback environment, which is really sort of like who is providing the feedback, how it is delivered, things of this nature. It's maybe a function of the culture of the organization. We're going to talk about organizational culture, but feedback environment, one component of the feedback environment, organizational culture. Listen to me. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. All right, feedback orientation. We're going to find in multiple points as we're going through the other topics in this, other presentations in this topic, that there are personality factors. Now, we're not doing it today, but I know it's coming up in one of these topics soon. But the big 5 personality traits, ocean, oh my gosh, outwardness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, what was that, extroversion, I did it. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Thank God. And so we find that there are personality characteristics that are incredibly important in all aspects of biopsychology. But here, this feedback orientation. Now, clearly, feedback orientation is not one of the big five personality traits. We can imagine feedback orientation being related to those five. Like, say, for example, people that are high in agreeableness, right, which is one of the five, would have a feedback orientation which would lead them to seek out or seek to please the evaluator or something like this. So employees high in feedback orientation tend to seek back more. And like I said, those that are high in feedback orientation are probably those that are high in agreeableness on the big five personality traits. So we find that traditional performance analysis and all of the research and work done on performance analysis was done based on a traditional work environment where the employees, the supervisors, the managers, etc. were all coming into physical face-to-face contact. But we've entered a world where so much of it is based on telework, right? People, telework by definition, employees working from home or some other location. And so all of a sudden, the only forms of communication are email, phone calls, texts, etc. And so all of a sudden, we find that these other sources of communication don't provide what a manager is usually looking for or a manager was trained for. Okay? And so all of a sudden, performance appraisal in these new environments opened it to a whole new set of challenges. Telecommuting, which is a very recent trend, is sometimes, here's the thing, look at this, in 2014, telecommuting may have weak or positive effect on performance. In other words, telecommuting can lead to better performance or worse performance, but it depends on situational characteristics. Yeah, you know what I bet you the situational characteristics are? How many children are sitting in your home while you're trying to work? Oh, hey, good, I'm just imagining. Or here in 2015, look at this. Telecommuting was positively associated with task performance and contextual performance. Remember, contextual performance is those intangibles like teamwork and things of this nature. And they found that telecommuting was enhanced by positive subordinate supervisor relationships. So they first report that it's situational, and then they start to hone in on certain aspects of the situation that might perhaps make telecommuting more effective. All right, so we'll stop there for now, and we'll come back on different, I believe, rating systems or mechanisms that are used in performance appraisals. All right.